The National Assembly has approved the supplementary budget of 2.1 trillion naira for the rest of the year 2023, as requested by President Bola Tinubu. The approval is, however, subject to harmonization as the Senate and House of Representatives versions differed on the 5 billion naira plan to be spent on the presidential yacht. While the Senate approved its purchase, the House rejected it and wants the sum added to the amount budgeted for student loan. Arise correspondent Omo Bazwaye has the report.
The Senate approved the supplementary budget of 2.1 trillion naira after it considered the report of the Standing Committee on Appropriation. The chairman, Solomon Olamilekan, said his committee received input from the leadership of the relevant subcommittees and heads of benefiting ministries, departments, and agencies of government in scrutinizing the details of the budget. Senate subsequently adopted the report, returning it in perfect order to the president, including the controversial plans by President Bola Tinubu to spend big on presidential yacht and sports utility vehicles SUVs, as well as other cars in the State House and Villa, including the office of the First Lady, an office that is not constitutionally recognized.
Fundamentally, the bill seeks to, among other things, 1, provide additional palliative measures, including the wage award for public servants, the enhanced cash transfer program, which is intended to benefit the most vulnerable members of the society, provide additional funds for critical defense expenditure urgently required for peace and security of lives and property, without which the government economic growth agenda cannot be achieved.
However, the situation is different in the House of Representatives, where lawmakers slightly adjusted the appropriation of the funds when they rejected the proposal to spend 5 billion naira on presidential yacht, but decided to add the money to a new student loan fund, increasing it from 5.5 billion naira to 10.5 billion naira.
As far as we are concerned, we don't have that presidential anymore. We have increased the student loan. If you can recall, student loan was 5 billion naira in the budget, but now we have increased it from 5 to 10 billion so that our students can be able to access that facility in order for them to go to school and to be affordable for them.
While the Senate and the House of Representatives will need to harmonize their position on the presidential yacht and student loan, they were pretty much on the same page on all other areas. A breakdown of the approved budget shows statutory transfer of 18 billion naira to the Independent National Electoral Commission (INEC). A total of 1 trillion naira will serve as recurrent non-debt expenditure, out of which 346 billion is for the Ministry of Defense, 29.6 billion for police formation and command. Others are the Office of the National Security Advisor with 39.6 billion naira. The Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security is allocated 103 billion naira, while 515 billion is earmarked as service-wide votes. The other half of the capital and expenditure framework is the capital component that gives 28 billion naira to the State House, 200 billion naira to the Ministry of Defense, Police Formation and Command 20.3 billion naira, Office of the National Security Advisor 10.3 billion naira, Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security 97 billion naira, Federal Ministry of Works 300 billion naira, the Federal Capital Territory Administration 100 billion naira, and what the National Assembly referred to as capital supplementation of 220.5 billion naira. Omo Bazwaye, Arise News.
Meanwhile, in response to concerns over the presidential yacht provision in the 2023 supplementary appropriation, the presidency says it is an operational naval boat with advanced security features and that it is not intended for the president's personal use. In a statement, the special advisor to the president on information and strategy, Bayo Ononuga, explained that the Navy ordered the boat during the previous administration and that President Tinubu's government only followed the continuum of government assets and obligations. He says the payment request for the boats is part of the commitments submitted by the Chief of Naval Staff to the Ministry of Defense, with only a portion of the total request approved by the president. All right, Rufai, you weren't here yesterday when we discussed this presidential yacht, and we had different sides with regards to responses and positions on whether the president needs a yacht as requested by the Navy. Your take on this?
So I had many opinions as regards the presidential yacht, and by the way, kudos to the House of Rep for finally listening to Nigerians, because it was totally abhorrent to even think of a presidential yacht payment of some sort at a time where a lot of Nigerians are suffering and they don't have access to the basics of life. It is very sad. At a time where the economy is tanking, it is very sad. At a time where businesses are suffering and reeling from economic quagmire, it is very sad. Concerning the yacht, so I heard the arguments back and forth, and this argument of being an operational boat, and I'm wondering, so why tag it presidential? The argument Mr. Onanuga makes is the fact that it's presidential because of the high level of sophistication, and I'm asking, operational boat, presidential yacht for naval sophistication and maneuverability? And I ask, what's going on? I mean, if you want proper operational boats, they are corvettes. They're minesweepers, they are cutters, they're name it. They are destroyers, they are frigates and all of that. But when you say a yacht, which we know is a luxury, boat, I mean, it leaves much to be desired. So I'm happy that it's finally out of the way. But I think what we should really think about is the supplementary budget. Yeah, we have a couple of statutory transfers there for INEC and the likes and some other bodies. But long-term revenue generation for Nigeria is a conversation that the government needs to have. Taking our time looking through the mid-term expenditure framework from 2024 to 2026, you see how we're exposed to a lot of shocks and the fact that we need to take a lot more debts. And part of those debts we have taken. For instance, we have taken some money to be able to defend our naira now, and we have securitized that against the future revenue we'll get from NLNG. So that revenue is not coming in. How do we block the revenue shortfalls? Also, the fact that, yes, we are doing well in terms of tax collection, VAT, and some other taxes, but our oil revenue has also reduced. So while we can take out all of this amount, increasingly we should look at the budget deficit that is unabating. Among the last three presidents since return to democracy, from Olusegun Obasanjo to President Yar'Adua, Jonathan, and President Buhari had the highest level of budget deficit, about 36 trillion budget deficit. So Nigeria must really think of fiscal discipline going forward, and how it's going to make money in the next couple of years, vis-a-vis the fact that we don't even have growth that will top 5% in the coming years based on these targeted projections we are making. I think those are the fundamental issues in all of this.
All right.
Okay, yesterday we discussed the issue of the yacht during the trending story segment. And I had made a point for purposes of information that Nigeria used to have a presidential yacht under the Nigerian Navy, NNS Yaro, or NNS Amaria, as it became known. And that vessel was a vessel that was repurposed by the Nigerian Navy, having been seized from a former governor of Rivers State. And it was decommissioned in 2011. But before then, that particular yacht was used. It was used by General Babangida. It was used at a time by General Obasanjo, as he then was, to host special guests. I think at a point, Prince Charles, as he then was, Prince of Wales, when he visited Nigeria, was hosted on that yacht. That yacht, the Nigerian Navy said they were using it for both ceremonial purposes and for operational training. Okay, once upon a time in this country, Nigeria had too much money. It could repurpose anything. Nigeria could provide as much luxury as possible. I think the big argument about this is that Nigeria does not need a yacht this time around. We don't need luxury items. If the Nigerian government is saying to the people that you have to make sacrifice, you have to, cut down, this is austerity season, the same government should be seen to be adopting the same line. So for me, I think the major story this morning is that the National Assembly, House of Reps, and the others, seem to agree with Nigerians that the Nigerian government should not be seen to be ostentatious. So the decision to move the 5 billion naira allocation for presidential yacht to student loans would seem to be a good idea. However, the student loans idea also is controversial. We don't have all the details about how it will be effectuated, and Nigerians are concerned that is this a way of increasing tuition fees through the back door? Would the student loans program not go the same way as the Student Welfare Loans Board introduced by the Gowon administration? Will it not go the same way as that other one? Now, the National Assembly, in approving the supplementary budget, acted as expected. So the big story is just about, the decision with regard to the yacht. They approved all the other expenses that the National Assembly, that the presidency wants, notably the purchase of vehicles, 1.5 billion vehicles for the office of the First Lady. I don't know where the First Lady is going to, that her office will need vehicles worth 1.5 billion. And then the additional over 2 billion vehicles for the president office. We have cited the example of President Nkande Ichilema of Zambia, who said he didn't want new vehicles. If Nigeria was going to follow that example, then of course, President Tinubu could just say, well, we don't need new vehicles, let's manage until Nigeria gets out of the woods. The third point is the talk about borrowing. I hope, we sincerely hope, that we are not going to borrow money to buy vehicles, to make life more comfortable for people who have been elected to make sacrifice on our behalf, to serve, not to consume. And the other point, of course, is that, look, Nigeria says, we have removed the fuel subsidy, we are going to provide palliatives for the suffering people of Nigeria. The way it is looking, it looks like the people in government, they want to enjoy more palliatives than the ordinary people. Because if the lawmakers in the National Assembly are going to be riding bulletproof SUVs, and people in the villa are saying we are going to renovate, we are going to buy vehicles, who is enjoying the palliatives now? Who is enjoying the savings from the fuel subsidy? Nigerians are saying they should be the priority. And the people of Nigeria should be the main priority. Public interest should predominate, not the luxury, the pleasure, the enjoyment of people who go into government. I think that's the big argument in this regard. As for the supplementary budget, I hope that Nigeria will be able to save from whatever surplus comes in and not use the money to make people in government more comfortable. Because the people in government, tomorrow, they will no longer be there. They will come back to normal life. And, they will see how to live out of government.
All right, so many issues around, and I'm glad that in the course of today's show, we're going to be having conversations around the budget, the supplementary budget, the economics of it, and also just justifying it, as we'll have Senator Ali Ndume. But from that position, first of all, let me say that the US and the UK, two of the most prosperous nations in the world, once had presidential fleets. The US had, in the UK's instance, it was a royal fleet. The US once had the Sequoia, which was called, also termed the floating White House. And it was for ceremonial purposes, sometimes for the president and high-ranking officials in government to spend some time either to host guests from the international, from their international guests, or perhaps just to spend some time off it with some, with some members of their family. For the UK, they had the Royal Britannica. And when some years ago, it was said to have to be decommissioned, they said, the Queen was almost in tears because of the attachment to that. But two things stand out. The reason why both were let go of, because of the cost of maintenance. Now, if these two nations deemed it fit that a presidential royal fleet, as a yacht, was not necessary because of the cost of maintaining it, what business does Nigeria at this point in its economic status have with asking for 5 billion naira to buy a presidential yacht? Don't forget that money does not include the money for maintenance. Look at how much we're spending to maintain Aso Rock. It talks about building maintenance or buying new cars every 4 years. And it seems as if the reality hasn't yet hit at presidential level how much we're trying to save or what situation we're in economically. It's either one or two things. Either we don't have the true picture of things and there's money somewhere that Nigerians are not aware of that is in surplus, hence the need for 1.5 billion naira spent on cars, 5 billion naira spent on a presidential yacht by the Navy and so on. Or the leadership does not have a true handle on the effect of what's going on the ordinary Nigerian. Hence, we think that we're still in the glory years when oil money was in abundance. Therefore, we could afford a luxury or two. As Dr. Bati already mentioned, at some point, we maintain a presidential yacht. And a lot of eyebrows weren't raised until much later when it didn't make economic sense anymore. And so these are the questions. And I'm hoping that the Senate will have conversations around this and reconsider their position in passing the 2.1 trillion naira as it was with the presidential yacht in there. The beginning and end of this story is that the president asked for 2.1 trillion naira. The House of Assembly has given him, the National Assembly has given him 2.1 trillion naira, even though they rejigged some figures in that particular budget. But 2.1 trillion naira in, 2.1 trillion naira out. So the question is, around the student loan, there are a few conversations as to how did they arrive at the 5 billion naira in the first instance, and how did the House of Representatives arrive at the fact that they needed an extra 5 billion naira to boost the student loan. Why not do away with it totally? Because for them to arrive at the amount of money required to execute the student loan, there must have been some sort of, some sort of review, some sort of analysis, some sort of conversations around this and research. And so what was the justification for increasing the 5 billion naira just to ensure that the 2.1 trillion naira remains the same? A number of questions, and I do believe that the House and the Senate, the National Assembly, that's House of Representatives and the Senate, ought to do more in protecting the interests of Nigeria and doing away with that tag of a rubber stamp assembly under this administration. It is important. If this nation must survive, we must have checks and balances from the legislature, on the executive. Move on to the next story. After 2 years in captivity, one of the students who was kidnapped from a school in Kaduna State has been released. Treasure Ayuba and 120 other students were abducted from Bethel Baptist High School in Chikun local government area on the 5th of July 2021. But 120 of them were released except one. The chairman of the Christian Association of Nigeria Kaduna chapter welcomes the news. The victim has now been reunited with his family but is unable to communicate in English again.
The grandmother told me that she was also just sitting in her room. And there was a knock at the door, and she opened, and lo and behold, our great son came back. How? And the story is that he also just came out by the roadside, and here vehicle saying Kaduna, Kaduna, Kaduna. He does not even know where exactly is the place, but he entered it and keeps sitting until they arrive Kaduna. And because he is not a small boy, he knows Kaduna. He finds himself in Sabo and knows the route to where his grandmother's house is, and that's all. So nobody fought to bring him, nobody went out to, and from what he says, you can hear the story. Even the key person that was keeping him is no more. But I think the other gang people kept him, and kept him longer.
When the camp chairman called me and said, come, emergency, emergency, and it's very urgent, very important I should come, I have cut across my mind all over this world. I said, what actually happened this night? I came, I didn't see anything. He didn't tell me anything. Until when he said, do I know this boy? I say, I don't know the boy. He said, this Treasurer Ayuba. And today, as if I'm in heaven. I am so happy. I am so happy. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. If I should leave this work today, I think I'm fulfilled. I'm fulfilled. I'm so happy. Treasurer, you are welcome back. You are welcome back. You are welcome back.
Treasure, you're welcome back. Great news this morning, Rufai.
What a very emotional one. And Treasure, welcome back to life. And I remember we followed this story very thoroughly here on the Arise News channel. And kudos to our representative out there in Kaduna who are constantly on this story. And we're happy that Treasure is back home today. But I'm also sad. I'm also sad because we have a nation that forgets people in captivity. The question is, all these years, was there anything we could have done to bring Treasure back, or we forgot him, just like the other Chibok girls that have not been seen since all these years? Did we do anything? And how come our forests are so big all of a sudden that we can't guard them again? I'll have rather we used or we spent this money that we wanted to spend on the presidential yacht, anyway it's botched now, to see how we can guard our large expanse of forest land, to be able to bring back all those that are in captivity back home. But it's a bittersweet one. A couple of things need to be done to Treasure. He needs to be reintegrated. He needs a lot of psychologists to work with him. He needs to learn how to speak English again. He needs a trauma counselor. And we all, as a society, need to be able to walk Treasure through this process again. Most importantly, he needs a lot of love. But the instructive question I ask every morning here in my very passionate delivery has always been, do we truly have that love to care enough about our nation and people in distress? Probably if we cared so much, Treasure would not be in captivity in the first place.
Okay, I think the major point that needs to be made is that no child in Nigeria, no student, whether in the secondary school or primary school or in a tertiary institution, should be abducted, kidnapped. The major responsibility for government is to make our learning environment safe for the Nigerian child. And we've been having this challenge. Under the Jonathan administration, we had what they called the Safe Schools Initiative. Nigeria collaborated with former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Gordon Brown, the Office of the Coordinating Minister of the Economy, at that time was involved in the project that Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, this day newspaper, led by Nduka Obagbena, was involved in all of that. So there was international and local and national private sector collaboration to make the schools safe. But we found ourselves in a situation whereby over the years, the schools have remained unsafe. And Kaduna has been a notorious center. This particular incident, Bethel Baptist school being attacked, occurred in July 2021. 120 of the students were released. Treasurer Ayuba has lost 2 years of his life. His other colleagues also lost part of their lives just because they belong to a country where schools are not safe. So the major issue is about how seriously do we take education in this country. President Tinubu at the presidential retreat for ministers and other appointees was saying just the other day that education will be a major priority for him. What the story of Treasurer Ayuba tells us is that, look, President Tinubu has to ensure under his watch that schools are safe for Nigerian students. That's the barest minimum that he has to do to worry about, beyond monetary allocation, budgetary allocation. Students can only learn if they are in a safe environment. That is the message. Because it will be most embarrassing if tomorrow we sit down here again on television and we're talking about, oh, some students have been abducted in XYZ state in Nigeria. If that happens, we will be in a position to say that, well, President Tinubu has failed in this particular regard. And that's also a message for the various security agencies. One of the things that came up under President Buhari was that many of these schools are not even properly fenced. They can be accessed by just any kind of hoodlum who will just go and pick up students. Was the Nigerian Defense Academy not also attacked? It happened. So the security agencies also have a responsibility to make sure that they do their job. We've been talking about supplementary budget, defense getting more money, Office of the National Security Advisor getting more money. What we hear about are just big figures being collected by departments, by ministries, by agencies. We would like to hear that those ministries, departments, and agencies are working. The president may give his approvals, but all these appointees, they must stop taking these appointments as chieftaincy titles, as items on the CV. They must do the work. That, I think, is the major issue that we face in this regard. Congratulations to Treasurer Ayuba. Congratulations to the school and the family. But I hope that the young man who we are told has now been taken to a medical facility for assistance will be given the opportunity to start his life afresh. But how about the memory? He will always remember that at some point, Nigeria failed him. The popular phrase on this program is that, oh, Nigeria happened to someone. Nigeria should not happen to people in a negative sense. There are people who benefited from this country through scholarships, through opportunities, but we should not create a pattern whereby Nigeria continues to disappoint the same young people that we say represent the future of the country. Our challenge is to secure the future by making sure that the youths of Nigeria are safe, secure, and they can get education and fulfill their potentials.
Well, talking about security, the supplementary budget submitted by the president to the National Assembly had received a boost in terms of the Ministry of Defense from 476 billion naira to 546 billion naira. So the House of Representatives Committee on Appropriation had deemed it fit to increase the figures because they felt that security was a big issue currently in the nation. They also increased the budget of the Office of the National Security Advisor from 27 billion naira to 50 billion naira, again because of the same reasons. And we're hoping that these and obviously had the highest chunk in terms of percentage of the supplementary budget. And what we're hoping is that these amounts allocated annually to defense security in Nigeria will be justified by what we see in terms of the protection of lives and properties and an end to banditry, kidnapping, terrorism across states in Nigeria. This was unfortunately the story of 121 boys at the Bethel Baptist High School in Kaduna, in Kaduna. And whilst 120 had been released, as we mentioned, one, for some curious reason, not obviously stated, was withheld. In fact, reports said that when they tried to get him back, because the Baptist Convention had to pay at the time 250 million naira in ransom to get back the children. In fact, a representative from the Baptist Convention had said that they had to resort to self-help because they didn't get as much support from the government in releasing these boys or in these students. That's something to also mention, because sometimes family members, friends are left to or are left with the responsibility of ensuring the release of their loved ones. If not, nothing will happen. They did commend at some points the efforts of the police, the efforts of the army in helping to secure the release, but they mentioned that in terms of the payments, they had to foot the bill and ensure that they had the money to pay ransom for these children. Treasure is back, and we thank God for that. The good news is that for some of the students who were released about a year ago, they said some of them had already gone back into school. They've started, some of them are even looking to write their GCE and WAEC. So they've been able to rehabilitate them to a large extent. We don't know if they were able, they received, at least yet, we don't know if they received some form of counseling, trauma counseling, and seeing a counselor. I hope that's part of the package for them, especially for Treasure. I do hope the Kaduna State government will take up this case and ensure that he receives the support required. Not just him, his family members as well, because this must be traumatic for his family members, his parents, his siblings, if he has any, to have had to endure 2 years of not having him at home. And more importantly, what can we do to ensure that students or Nigerian children are not discouraged from going to school, especially in the north, which makes up the highest numbers of out-of-school children in Nigeria, with Nigeria being the nation with the most number of out-of-school children in the world. How do we tackle the security issue so that it does not discourage our children from going to school? These are some of the critical issues. As Dr. Bati mentioned, and we talked about this yesterday, President Tinubu has spoken, given the right information with regards to his stance on education. We must invest in education to ensure that we tackle poverty. But in order to invest in education, we must also invest in security and welfare of our schools and students so that they are not discouraged from going to school.